The Yellow Ranger is so hungry and so thirsty. He thinks that he sees a waterfall. He's like, oh, fresh water. I'll go get a drink. And he runs, and the other Ranger's like, no, there's no waterfall there. You're seeing an illusion. And the Yellow Ranger just chucks himself off of the side of it's not a real cliff with a bunch of jagged rocks, but it certainly could have been his death, and he ends up rolling down a very steep hill. The other four Rangers are telling you, there's no waterfall, bro. You know? Gut reaction. Hello, hunters, and welcome back to TheSalawag's Why It's Great Gut Reaction, where I watch things and react from the gut. I've just watched the first 4 episodes of Zyuranger, the original Japanese Power Rangers back from 1992. This was pretty cool because actually I was inspired to watch this not just because of my love of Power Rangers, but also I'd seen a review from... I'm blanking on your name. I'm so sorry. I'd seen a review from a really great podcaster who had reviewed all of the... I had mentioned him before. He had reviewed all of the original Japanese Power Ranger shows and Ultraman and stuff like that. And I'll put his name here. But he did such a good job and really sold it for me, and he didn't spoil anything. He did a really great job of talking about it without spoiling it. But I'm here to spoil it a little bit. Now, this is just to talk about the first 4 episodes. We'll see if I decide to talk about more. But one of the things that got me watching it is I am a filmmaker, and I'm partially watching this as research for projects I want to do in the future. I'll save talking about that for a future episode where I'm actually working on those projects. But my hope is to make my own Power Rangers, Godzilla, live action men in suits type of sequence, and so hopefully I'll watch enough of this and sort of learn more about how they made it so that I can really do something effective and fun and cool, because I do feel like in this day and age of the computer doing everything, and yes, it is actually guys behind the machine doing it, we just know. We know when we look at things and real light is not actually touching it. Our eyes know it because that's what we look at every day of the week. And so that to me is the spectacle and what makes the original Power Rangers, in particular this Japanese version, so magical to me to watch, is that yes, it's a bit of a cheesy story. It's from another time, literally from another time. And magic is actually a huge element of these shows. While there is all of that, to me it's wonderful to see them have these guys in suits, to have these amazing physical, like this is special effects. Someone, I think Red Letter Media, I just saw them talking about, what is it? They were talking about the Friday the 13th movie, and there's a difference between visual effects, which is computer animation, meaning it's a visual, but it's not a special effect, which is a physical effect done live on camera. And I'm just enamored with the magic of what they did with the Zords, and you have the Tyrannosaurus as a guy in a suit, and then you have the other Zords, and there are these amazing effects where you have the Triceratops Zord, which is basically a tank but with a Triceratops look, and you have it's driving on what appears to be sand and all that, and then you have the saber-tooth Tiger Zord, which is leaping over things, but it might be a puppet, but it really is leaping over objects, and I really love that stuff. I wish we could bring special effects back in a big way, and I do think there's a very high chance of its popularity returning, because the fact of the matter is people are still in love with Power Rangers. That all these decades later, these full-grown adults like myself still go to see the Power Rangers at conventions and still watch their shows and show them to their kids, and their kids grow up loving the Power Rangers. And even when I was growing up in love with the Power Rangers, the American version as a kid, and I would watch the Godzilla 98, and I loved that. In that case, it was CGI, and I loved the realism of it. And they would scoff and say, no, that's not the real Godzilla. The real Godzilla is a guy in a suit. And that also inspired me to go back and watch the original Godzilla, which I'm also doing, but that's a separate video. But as for the Power Rangers, seriously, the Japanese version is a superior version of the show. And I hate to say anything negative about the American version that I grew up with. That is the reason I love the Power Rangers. There's no question. When I started watching the first episode of the Zyuranger, it was right into the effects. The effects were amazing. We see these astronauts going to space. It's clearly some kind of not too distant future where the astronauts can bring their kids as well. But we also see the unveiling of Bandora, the witch Bandora. Instead of Rita Repulsa, it's Bandora. Don't know the cultural connection or baggage there. But when Rita shows up, the first thing she does, there are no Rangers. We don't see the Rangers. She shows up and just starts moving entire skyscrapers next to each other and blowing up other buildings. And it's this full-on, like, war scale level attack. And this is, mind you, this is before Independence Day. But also Godzilla has already been destroying entire towns since the 50s, so Japan is used to this. And and there are American movies there where we had Ray Harryhausen and all that. But in terms of as far as these Power Rangers are going, I could not believe the level of destruction the witch Bandora was laying on this Japanese town, and it was really spectacular and amazing. And the effects still, I think, hold up. I think, yeah, you can kind of tell they're miniatures, but the lighting's very good. The texture of the miniatures is very realistic, and intercut and composited with real live footage. If it was a movie, it would probably look perfect, but even on this sort of TV show scale, it really looked cinematic. There's a real appreciation of what cinema should look like in especially this first episode, but definitely in all of the effects, like the special effects, bringing the Zords or bringing the destruction or the monsters, whatever it is, they're really on the level of big cinema. And I think it's probably because of the standards set by the Godzilla movies, which were only getting bigger and bigger with each one, as far as I can tell. And yeah, the effects were really what got me. But also, from a story point of view, we're not, if you're used to the American version, there's these teenagers who are already friends with each other who just get summoned by Zordon. Who knows why? Because of their magical good character that's not really established. But they are friends with each other already, which gives us, in the American version, at least this is why they're working well together as a team, because they're already friends with each other. But when you come to the Japanese version, Bandora is destroying Japan, and there's a wizard who she has this old grudge with. And it's the wizard who goes, oh no, Bandora's back, I must summon the legendary heroes. And he goes to this magic temple in Magic Land, in the magical dimension, where the Rangers are behind these big concrete stone doors that have their particular prehistoric animal in front of each door. There's a Tyrannosaurus stone head, a Mastodon stone head, or a saber-toothed stone head. And behind each door is just a bunch of light and smoke. And but this really incredible effect that was used in the Superman the movie. If you watch Superman the movie, Zod and his two disciples are imprisoned in this reflective mirror glass that sends them, that is essentially the Phantom Zone. What sense does that make? But anyway, that same effect is used for This Is How the Rangers Are Sleeping, in this kind of floating mirror that kind of resembles the mirror from Superman the movie. And then they're energized out of it, and they're all summoned. But at least in the logic of the story, magic is clearly a huge part of why these people are sleeping, and when they come out of it, they are already trained warriors. So the story has a lot of structural things that, although magic is sort of just being waved as a wand for everything, in terms of story construction, at least it is very clearly established. These are legendary heroes. They've already done it for some period of time prior to being asleep. And so when they come out and they know how to use their weapons and they know everything, you don't have to question that aspect of it. Because definitely in the American version, it's just suddenly, oh, I am good at kung fu, and I'm good at fighting with weapons, and I'm making all these poses that I don't make in my normal human state. And when I get in my Zord, wow, it just comes to me. I just know what I'm doing. The American version does so many logical skips. And I think the real flaw of the 2017 American reboot of the Power Rangers was trying to address those skips a little bit too much. Literally, they copy the Breakfast Club and make everyone become friends in the movie. But then you're spending so much time making them be friends and making them learn how to use their powers. And that's still, when they get to the Zords, it really doesn't make sense. So it's like, you gotta skip something. And at least the American version made them friends already so that they could spend some time getting adjusted to fighting the putties and getting them into their suits and stuff. But what I love about the Japanese version is that in terms of story structure, they're already trained, they already know how to work well together, and they don't even have their Zords in this first episode. The first episode takes us to a cliffhanger where Rita has kidnapped the children and the space shuttle that's flying in space. And basically there's a stalemate where it's like you have to save the kids in a certain amount of time. And the Rangers don't even know if they can do that. Which gives us a way into the second episode where the Rangers do find a way, and that's what the second episode's about. And it's at the end of that episode that we get a giant villain for them to fight. And we're only introduced to the Tyrannosaurus sword. So in terms of sort of budgeting and story construction, we're being introduced to each element of the story as it's needed to come into the story. Whereas when it comes to the American version, right from the first episode, they have the full Megazord and they already know how to use it. So as far as the show goes, there's nowhere for the story to go in the American version. Once the Rangers know everything and have all the Zords, story-wise, they don't really have anywhere to go. They don't have any growth to go into. So I like that, although in the Japanese version they're already trained warriors, they don't have all the weapons right away. So this was something that was talked about in that podcast that I mentioned. And if I remember, I'll put the link in the description as well, because he was great, and I love his toy collection. He's got all the Zords and all the Rangers. He's got a great collection. But just in terms of story construction, that's what I'm really impressed with this show, is that it gives itself room to grow. And in terms of your budget, if you're budgeting out a show, you maybe can't do all of the amazing effects right in the first episode. You have these stunts, you have all these crazy stunts, you have these crazy gags with these villains with various powers, and that all takes an enormous amount of time. So you're really spacing out your time and your effects for what can fit in every episode. I think it's very, very well written, and all of the effects in the first episode go towards setting up what a villain and what an enemy and what personal baggage Bandora has with the old wizard. And the second episode is really the team building episode where we see kind of how the team works, who's in charge, and you see that they do have this united desire to be heroes as well as having the training. And then when we get into episode 3 and 4, we kind of get more into their individual characteristics. Now there's in the American version, we have the Island of Illusion, which is like the 10th episode or something like that. But here we have, in the 3rd episode now, the Rangers are fighting with some of their ancient weapons that they, because they're from ancient times. And the legend is told. I love this beautiful telling of the legend that these Rangers come from a time period where man existed with dinosaurs right alongside them, not unlike the Flintstones. And in that time period, there were legendary warriors that were the Zords. The Zords themselves are these legendary warriors who have all these powers, and they were the first protectors of the world, of Earth. And they have their own personalities. I thought, that's beautiful. That's really cool. Because you can kind of feel it when you watch the American version. I've always felt that. Like these Zords had their own kind of personality and their own interests and their own character. But it's all really edited out of the show for the American version, because in the American version, they're just vehicles for people to drive. There's nothing else going on there. But I really appreciate that, the dragon, the Tyrannosaurus Zord is just this, is personality-wise very in line with Geki, the Japanese version of the Red Ranger, where they're the leader, and I'm here to kick butt, and Jason matched that spirit to a degree, but to see the Zords have that kind of personality, and we don't, like I said, in the 3rd episode we only see the Tyrannosaurus Zord, and it does defeat the bad guy, but and you see in the American version how they just kind of break it up and they make it, they have the Zords already, and then they just get individual episodes where you can sort of feature the action of one of the other Rangers and their Zord, and that's fine, I guess. But I love that it takes to the 4th episode for all the Zords to come out, because they are needed. The story requires it. It's not just this repeated beat of, we've been knocked down. Well, the only way to do it is all the Megazords at once. I really like the story requires for it to go that far. It very much, even in the story structure and the themes, they have that value that's in the American version, which is never accelerate a situation until it's required. And that value is very much in the very storytelling itself. It's like, if the Rangers can defeat a bad guy without summoning a Zord, then they do it. And then the 3rd and 4th episode is a journey toward finding their mystical weapons, the weapons that they have that we know so well, the individually colored weapons that are so strong, which they don't even have in the 1st episode. In the 1st episode, the only logical stretch for me, and maybe it shouldn't be a logical stretch because the Zords are obviously mechanical, but how we have these ancient mystical people, and yet their superpowered version of themselves is basically modern leotard clothing and these little modern guns that become mini sabers. I always thought that was kind of funny. That was like, okay, so you're in the past, but you have future tech. Okay, that for me is like the only thing that doesn't make sense to me. Why wouldn't you look at least a little bit more of the time period of being sort of like, what was that show? There is a show that kind of does this, The Mystic Knights of Tirnanog, where why wouldn't you look more like a knight? Why wouldn't you look more like that time period? But for me, if I was making Power Rangers myself, that's what I would do. And I have a whole pitch to sell to Saban if you guys would ever listen to me. If you see anything I do and you think, this guy might get it, but I'll save that elevator pitch for the elevator. But anyway, so that has always been my wonder. Like, if this is so ancient, why doesn't it look ancient? Why do you have modern leotards? And it's just because this is the genre. Super Sentai is leotards and explosions and sparks off of leotards. It's just the genre that we're in. It's like superheroes where they wear, that's what they wear. And you just kind of have to take it as it is. But that was my only logical question. I feel like there's many more logical questions with the American version, but at least you can just say magic, you know. And clearly the ancient guardians, and that's what I like, is that every time the T-Rex comes up, it's the Tyrannosaurus guardian. It's like a god, you know what I mean? It's like a god knight or something like that. I really like there's a sense of what the position is of both the Zord and the Ranger, whereas in the American version it's just the morphing grid, and it turns things into technologically advanced things, and I'm from space, I guess, you know, like, okay, all right, whatever it takes to get there. But again, like, in terms of story construction, again, Rita kidnaps another kid for the third episode, and the Rangers have to go to this little island in another dimension. It's literally a floating rock in a space dimension, where they have to recover their mystical weapons. And it takes the entirety of the both episodes for them to actually reach the weapons. And even when they get to the weapons, the bad guys are waiting for them to sabotage them. And I think it's really great how they essentially episode 1 and 2 is a two-parter, and episode 3 and 4 is a two-parter. And while in the American version, the Island of Illusion makes you invisible, or like erases you from existence, because that's what we could afford. In the Japanese version, here we have I've already forgot, it's the Land of Desolation or something like that. But in this version, you know, on the Island of Illusion, if you got too afraid, it wiped you out of existence. Whereas in the Land of Desolation, or whatever it's called, it's if you get too sad. If you in the Land of Despair, if you get sad, you will turn into stone. And the Rangers manage to not turn into stone, but the boy that they're looking for turns to stone. And there's kind of a subtle message here, you know. Our warriors are trained to not despair. They're trained for this. They know to keep their head on straight in the middle of serious situations. And they're closer to adulthood. It's not really clear that they're teenagers. I don't think they're teenagers, even though the Pink and Yellow Ranger do seem to be the youngest. They're not overtly, or it's not stated so far that they're in their teenage years. They just seem to be young adults. And definitely the Red, Black, and Blue Ranger look like they're in their 20s. But they all just seem to be young adults. And again, like, they have the age and the fortitude, emotional fortitude, and the training to resist that. But I think it's kind of this message that even to young people, like, if you want to get through horrible situations, you must not despair, or at least not give in to despair, and you must keep your head on straight and keep going. That's kind of what I felt from the episode 3 and 4 two-parter, is that there seemed to be, and this is, by the way, this show is for podcast. This podcast is not just for me to review things for the regular person. I'm reviewing this as a filmmaker. I've been a filmmaker for over 15 years. I'm reviewing this as a filmmaker to say to you other filmmakers out there who might be trying to learn, this is what you should be paying attention for. Because in my training in learning how to be a storyteller, one of the things, there's sort of three sort of main elements. Like, there's a lot of things you can break storytelling down into. Style, speed of your edits, all that kind of stuff. You know, the style of the design of your characters, whatever. All of that is a bit more superfluous, and it's a more important after you understand the most important elements of storytelling, which is, why are you telling your story? The why, and I say this over and over again, it's your idea that generates your execution. People like to say this phrase that I find it makes sense, but it is also ass backwards, where it's not the idea, it's the execution. But to me, no. Great art comes from the notion. If you look at George Lucas's Star Wars and you go from the prequels to the originals, or the originals to the prequels, Anakin Skywalker, that's a story about, not unlike the Power Rangers, Anakin Skywalker, he can't resist his emotions, but he has so much reason for why he can't. As a young boy, he's taken from his mother to join the Jedi, and his only surrogate father is Qui-Gon Jinn, and he dies in Phantom Menace. And so all this boy knows is loss from a very young age. And when he's trained by Obi-Wan is only a few years older than him. Technically like 8 or 10 years older, but still, he's only a sibling's age in difference. And so when he's trained by Obi-Wan, he has this sort of sibling rivalry, hatred of Obi-Wan, who didn't even want to train him. And throughout his years, he's groomed by Senator Palpatine, who becomes a chancellor. He's groomed by this man to become the guy that he looks for the emotional support. Because what the Jedi can't see that the Sith embrace is emotion. And Palpatine takes advantage of that. He sees this boy who has enormous loss, and he doesn't see that as a burden. He says, no, this is my pathway to influence you. And this is the same thing that it's a tool that good people and bad people use. Some people do it instinctively. Some people learn it because they see it growing up. But because Palpatine witnesses this vulnerability, he takes advantage of it and says, well, I will be the one who dotes on you and who says you're great all the time, while these Jedi are just hammering you into the perfect lightsaber wielder. I will be kind to you and tell you you're great all the time, and basically be what Qui-Gon Jinn and Shmi were for you. I will be this kind representation of maturity to you. And when it comes down to it, when the Jedi don't make you a master, and when they are critical of you all the time, I'm going to tell you, well, I want you to have some special place in my life. And it's that emotional thing that Palpatine grabs onto, that he uses to leverage Anakin. And he knows Anakin can't resist his emotions, and he knows that his emotional manipulation will pay off when the boy is older, and all he needs to do is wait. But this is very much, good people can do this as well, where good people can guide people away from the bad path by paying attention to their vulnerabilities and their needs and just honing them in the right way. But what the Jedi at the time could not do for their arrogance, the Sith did for Anakin. But when it comes to the original trilogy, we have the sins of the father visiting the children, and it's Luke Skywalker who sees the consequences of all the choices that his father made, even before he knew that his father was Vader. To see the consequences of a totalitarian society, to see the consequences of a dictator who can torture people at will, to see all of those consequences and to suffer for them. And out of that, Luke grew up with an uncle and aunt that did love him. And when he lost them, he had Obi-Wan, who, as an old man, who had learned what Qui-Gon Jinn tried to teach him when he was his master. And Luke had all the benefits of having something of a normal life growing up. Even though he didn't have his parents, he had something of a normal life to grow up with. And when he met his mentor was ready to be a mentor for him and had learned from his mistakes and simply Obi-Wan, as an old man, didn't try to control Luke the way he tried to control Anakin. And and truth be told, Luke's heart was in the right place. You know, he had the right examples to grow up with, but Luke's heart was always in the right place. And it's Luke's willingness to forgive his father. You see, Star Wars is about, it's about how you gain your character through nature or nurture. And it's about your self-control of yourself as both a warrior and as a person in society. And in that reflection, although it's just a small aspect of this episode of Power Rangers, of Zyuranger, although it's a very small aspect of the show, I very much felt like right there is a life lesson sort of being taught to kids. And that's what these shows and movies are about. Superhero shows, they are about moral lessons, but also just general life stuff is in there too. You know, the kid had so much despair, he turned to stone. He could not help himself. But the adult, who had already been through everything and had been trained for it, was able to rescue the kid. But it's also a lesson to the kid. When the kid grows up, he must remember that, you know, in times of despair, you must still hold yourself together and move forward. And maybe I'm reading too much into it, and I am guilty of that a lot. But that's just what I felt from it in just what is really just one scene. And I think it is also exemplified within the episodes, because the Yellow Ranger, especially in episode 3, he's walking around and he's complaining about being hungry all the time. And he even almost starts getting full of despair. And then the other Rangers have to warn him, stop complaining about the food right now. Because if you get sad, you will turn into stone and you will be no good, and you won't be able to get your weapon. But again, he's old enough and he has the maturity to listen to them and control himself. But to me, the message is very clear from those two instances. Like, look, this episode's not just about being entertaining. It is about teaching the sort of life lesson of that things get hard and you have to kind of keep it together and do the best that you can. And that, to me, if you can, as a filmmaker, look for that meaning and look for that value, and infuse that into your artwork, then is what makes you a superior filmmaker. To me, the inferior filmmaker can only get you with a couple gags and yeah, okay, maybe they get a nice pretty shot in there. But if you're not looking at the why is, why are you making the story go this way? You know, why are the characters making these decisions? And it can't just be because they need to get to the end. It has to be from a story point of view and from a thematic point of view, the theme being the why. You know, the character has to learn a lesson. They have to have an arc. They have to have something going on. Even Workaholics. I just watched another episode of Workaholics. And in this episode of Workaholics, these our three main characters are eating food, and a Latina tough street girl tells them to give her their food, and they say no, but they do give her their drink. And in that first interaction, they've peed themselves, and they run into her again later, and she scares them again, and two of them don't pee themselves. One of them pees just a little bit, and he's like, ooh, a little improvement. And then by the end of the episode, they team up with her, and she still scares them, but they all stand strong, and they have conquered their fear of her enough to stand together and say, we're not scared of you. And so she does give them back one thing that she was trying to take from their house, because they teamed up, and and they're asking for her help. So I think a little compensation's fair, but she's just taking all their beer. But their courage, and they don't pee. I was like, wow, this is the first time you guys actually have an arc in your show. So having an arc is not a requirement in storytelling, but it does help. And so I do appreciate that our Yellow Ranger's mini arc. It's not really an arc, but our Yellow Ranger's hunger and it drives him to literally throwing himself off of a cliff. Oh, but that's the other thing, so that I might have to edit this around a bit. The Yellow Ranger is so hungry and so thirsty, at first he almost despairs, and so the Rangers must tell him not to despair. But then he thinks that he sees a waterfall, and he's like, oh, fresh water, I'll go get a drink. And he runs, and the other Ranger's like, no, there's no waterfall there, you're seeing an illusion. And the Yellow Ranger just chucks himself off of the side of it's not a real cliff with a bunch of jagged rocks, but it certainly could have been his death, and he ends up rolling down a very steep hill, and the other Rangers have to go after him. But that in itself, it's telling you thematically what's going on is like, no matter what your situation is, you have to keep your head on straight. And literally, the other 4 Rangers are telling you, there's no waterfall, bro. It's like, but he's so certain there's a waterfall. And he's the victim of the illusions of the island because he's the one who cannot resist his emotion. So he doesn't like come out at the end of the episode like changed and resisting everything he has, but he ends up being, when they reach the final challenge in episode 4, he's the first one. It's this challenge where you have to take a sword from a stone, but he ends up being the first one to grab the stone because he's the hungriest to leave, and the hungriest to leave the island. So when he grabs the sword, it has a curse upon it where whoever touches it will become evil. And so he touches it first, and he shows the consequences of having these vampire teeth and looking more feral. And it's a cheesy edit, you know what I mean? But at least thematically, it's happening for a reason. He is the vulnerable one to this particular challenge, and it's through him. Again, now we're going back to story structure. It's through the vulnerable one, the Yellow Ranger, that we see the challenges the island has for these Rangers. Because they are the heroes, you do want them to all be kind of heroic, but you need someone to both be afraid for and to show the consequences of what they're facing in order for when you reach the ending and they get the weapons, for you to really feel like they accomplished something. Because it's not really accomplishment if there's no challenge in front of you. And the bigger the challenge, like I said, Yellow Ranger almost chucked himself to his own death because he was looking for an illusion, because it's the island of despair. It's the island is by design testing you to your own sense of despair, and the island wants him to fail. But really, I always see this like, I talk about this in another episode, it's like the temptations. It's the temptation. If you can resist the temptation, then you're a master of yourself. And if you're a master of yourself, that is what will grant you whatever you're looking for in your life, whether it's nirvana or whether it's the legendary weapons. And and then they get the legendary weapons, and they call their Zords, and they defeat the bad guy, and it's amazing. But yeah, so I just really wanted to shout out to this really epic story construction of what is just the first 4 episodes. If I review more, I might review more, I might not. But I was very impressed with how well at least the first 4 episodes of Zyuranger was put together. I think it shows a lot of promise. And again, when it comes to kids television, it is so important to have these types of values. One of my favorite shows growing up was the show Gargoyles and X-Men, and both shows simultaneously were dealing with our main character is different from the rest of society, and a not the entirety of society, but portions of society are afraid of them because of their differences and persecute them. In Gargoyles, it starts off with the obliteration of most of the race of gargoyles, where gargoyles, like trolls, turn to stone during the day. And Gargoyles starts off with a bunch of men from a warring clan, human men, coming over and bashing the gargoyles essentially to death in their stone form. And it's like this, the extreme racism, not unlike what Hitler and the Nazis, that type of deal. And on the X-Men side, you had the building of the Sentinels, which were giant machines powerful enough to basically take down most mutants on their own. But these are cartoon shows that are for kids, but they're always about something. And when you go to Spider-Man, it's where X-Men and Gargoyles are about, okay, yes, society might be extremely racist and it might be doing horrible things, but when you look at Goliath and what remains of his clan, or if you look at Professor X and the X-Men, the message is, no matter how bad it gets, you must keep your mind and your heart pure, because you must set the example of what those terrified people just clearly never had. You have to, as hard as it is, you have to set the example of being peaceful and moving forward. And very much the famous Selma walk, which I haven't even seen that movie, but what better example of that than that walk, where all these black people and some white, but all these black people walking and going through the gauntlet of what people are throwing at them, and being an example of, like, you think strength is beating me down, but I will show you that strength is actually putting up with you. And it's not just putting up with you out of spite, but strength is resisting the urge to be like that, and showing that true strength is standing together. And that's what teams represent. And that all comes back to Power Rangers. Well, Power Rangers is not really about bad society. In Power Rangers, society is good overall, but you just have these horrible people who are doing terrible things to society, and somebody's got to stand up to them. And it's a different kind of hero's journey. Each hero has their own version of what morality looks like and what they're dealing with. But when you look at the Power Rangers, it's duty. It's duty toward each other and duty toward society. And Bandora's selfish anger. And now we don't know the full story. And I do believe, based on the podcast I watched, that her story will be revealed. Because she does, like I said, in episode 1, she was very clearly angry and vengeful for being trapped for so long. And she even says that she has this personal philosophy that humanity is not worth saving and they're not worthwhile existing. And I hope the translation's correct, but that's her belief too. She believes she's superior to society and superior to man, and wants to reduce Earth to burnt out cinder. And the wizard believes in mankind and believes it's full of good people and they deserve to live. But whatever baggage they have is extremely personal for whatever it is that happened in their backstory. That was very clear from the first episode. So I think there's also an element of, like, again, just going back to the Yellow Ranger's vulnerability, it's like, whatever is hurting you on the inside, if you don't deal with it the correct way, it'll turn you into Bandora, or it'll turn you into stone. And very much the heroes represent that sort of positive attitude that no matter what the challenge is or what the trial is or what the suffering is, you got to stay good and you got to do your best to be good, because life will be better for it. And so that's what heroes represent to me, and that's what I see as always the theme leads the story. Again, as filmmakers, the why has to come first. Why you're telling the story or this particular episode is everything. And you know, then comes all the frills and the fun. And it's fine to make entertainment, but just remember, when you're making entertainment, you got to think a little deeper. You got to, and that might be a little bit more boring, but you got to think a little deeper and figure out what exactly that you have to say. And if you don't have anything to say, find something to say, because that's what grabs people at the end. You know, it's always that emotional pull. You know, there's the themes, there's the characters, there's the emotions. It's where are those three things, wherever your characters may be, that's what actually involves the audience. You know, and it's just the theme is what creates the situation. You know, in the beginning of episode 3, the son is mad that his mom tells him to do his homework, and he says, "I wish my mom wasn't here." And then immediately Bandora makes the mom disappear, and then him too. And sort of that angry despair, you know, they're punished for their wishes right away. And it takes the heroism of some very helpful friends to the heroism of some very helpful friends to save them and to bring them out of the darkness. And when the boy is reunited with his mom, it's a beautiful reunion. And you know, he doesn't say, "Oh, I'll do homework now," but he's grateful for his mother, and it's a nice little thing to have. You know, the emotion is important as well, but the theme or the beware what you wish for, that is what sort of drives the rest of this. Is don't be driven by base emotion, because you may lose something more valuable. Like in the Yellow Ranger's case, it's your life, and in the boy's case, it's his mother. So there's always something deeper going on with the stuff that we love most, and even Godzilla itself has deeper underpinnings. So that's all I got to say. I said a lot, and not much of it had to do with Power Rangers at the end there. But I hope you enjoyed this review, and I hope if you're a filmmaker, you're paying attention with me. Think a little deeper. It's better for whatever you're making to think a little bit deeper and to care a little bit more what's going on with your characters. Thank you very much for watching, and aloha, nerds.